interact with my Rails and JavaScript application Movement Mixer. This application allows personal trainers and their clients to design custom workout routines together. So as a client, I'm going to create a workout routine called Ballerina Workout. It will be beginner difficulty level, and it will take about 15 minutes. The first exercise movement in my routine will be a plie. I will do 3 sets of 8 reps. I can click this button to add another exercise via more exercise fields via JavaScript. I will perform a releve. Maintaining good posture. Stand on your tiptoes. Lower down slowly and then ascend, creating your own resistance. I'll perform 3 sets of 10 reps. And I can specify the type of equipment I need to use during this workout. A ballet bar, quantity 1. I will click this button to add more fields through JavaScript, to add another piece of equipment, an exercise ball. And I will have 10, which is 10 pounds. This workout will target my calf muscles, and this workout employs the bar training type. So when I click this button to submit the form to create a workout, I will fulfill one of the requirements of my project to submit the form dynamically through JavaScript. So here we go. As an example, a user, a client in this case, is submitting the form to create a new workout routine, and what happens is the form data is serialized and submitted via an AJAX post request. So I'm basically hijacking the normal HTTP post form submission to the route /routines, and instead I'm making an AJAX post request using the jQuery post method to the endpoint of /routines. And this endpoint maps to the create action in my routines controller. So in routines create, if a valid routine is created and saved to the database, then this action will render a JSON object representation of my newly created workout routine. And it's worth noting that the status code will be 201 to indicate that a resource was successfully created. So the routine.form submission listener in routines.js will handle the hijacking of the submit action of the form to create a new workout routine. And then at this point, within my routine.create function, I will create a new routine object from the JSON object representation. So I pass the routine object, successful JSON response, to my routine constructor function and store that object in the variable new routine. And then I call my prototype method format and present preview on this new routine object, which will use the new routine object as the context passed to a handlebars template function to basically display this routine. So just to give a little backstory, I created a handlebars template found within a script tag, a script with an ID of routine template. And the variables found between the handlebars delimiters in this template have the same names as the keys in my new routine object. So in new routine format and present preview, I basically invoke the function routine.routine template function this, where this is the new routine object on which I'm calling the prototype method. And I'm essentially taking that handlebars template that I've compiled. I've already created a function by taking the string HTML code that makes up the template inside of the script tag, and it has already been compiled as a part of a function along with the handlebars delimiters. And when that handlebars templating routine template function is invoked inside of my format and present preview method, I'm taking the values corresponding to the keys in my new routine object, and I'm using those values to replace the handlebars delimiters in the template. So the result of this is the HTML from the handlebars template to display the newly created routine with values injected from the new routine object that was rendered in a JSON format before. And I basically take this HTML with values injected from my new routine object, and I make it the inner HTML of the div with an ID of preview routine, which we see right here. And so I've basically taken the form is submitted. I'm taking the response. It is being presented in a JSON format, and it is being appended to the DOM. I'm injecting it into the DOM here. So in a similar fashion, there are other forms in my application. So I can sign in as a trainer, Tracy at movementmixer.com, trainer Tracy. And as a trainer, you can view workout target areas, getting the index of target areas through JavaScript. You can create a new workout target area, such as, I don't know, the heel, if I'm a ballerina. And I can basically create that target area and it'll be appended to the list. I can do the same thing for training types. And as a user, I can basically sign back in, as a client rather, and I can view my exercise guide. So this is where I fulfill one of my other project requirements, which is to render a show resource, one specific thing, via JavaScript and an active model serialization JSON backend. So as I can see here, I'm currently on the movement show page, and I allow a user to peruse exercise movements by clicking the next and previous buttons on the movements show page. So to do this, in my routing file, I first defined two custom routes, get movements ID next, which maps to the next action of the movements controller, and get movements ID previous, which maps to the previous action of the movements controller. And when the user clicks the button to go to the next exercise, for example, releve, what's happening is I am making a call using fetch for the fetch API to /movements ID next. And this string URL endpoint maps to the next action in my movements controller. And so going into my movements controller, I have a before action called set movement, which will basically find the current at movement instance that I'm viewing by using the ID route variable in the URL. And in the next action, I call the next instance method on the movement instance that I'm currently viewing. And this instance method is defined in my movement model. And what the next instance method does is it returns the first instance in the collection of movement instances whose IDs are greater than the current movement's ID. So in this case, if I'm on play, clicking the next exercise button, in the instance method next, I will be finding all movements that exist that are greater than the current movement's ID and grabbing the first one. And if none exists, I will instead return the first movement that is, the first movement that is stored in the database, so that I can kind of create this cyclical pattern. So at this point in my JavaScript, I know that in my movements controller's next action, I will be rendering a JSON representation of the next movement. And then in my JavaScript function, movement.showNext or previous listener, when I make this fetch call, the return value that I get back for making the fetch call is a promise. And I have to resolve this promise by tacking on a call to .then and passing in a callback arrow function in which I'm getting back my response. So in this callback arrow function, I get implicit returns, and the response is the parameter of the callback arrow function, and I want to return the response as JSON, hence I'm calling then arrow function response as the parameter of the arrow function response.json being implicitly returned. However, another promise is returned from this, which I must also resolve by tacking on another call to then, and in the callback function passed to the second call to then, that's when I finally can access my JSON object representation of the movement, of the next movement that I'm trying to view. So in my second call to then, I'm passing in movement.show, which stores a function whose parameter is movement object. And as I said, this is the JSON object representation of the next movement. And to show the next or previous movement, I created another handlebars template, which is found inside the script tag with an ID of show movement template. And first I compiled a string template source code with the variables found between the delimiters as part of a function that I can invoke with the context object. So in movement, in my movements.js file, I have a function called movement.show. I first generate a new movement object using let. So let new movement is equal to new movement object, where the movement object is my successful JSON response. And I call format show prototype method on the new movement object. And much like in the other example of creating a workout routine, my prototype method will invoke a handlebars template function, movement.showMovement template function, and pass in the new movement object, referred to as this, as its argument. So once again, because the names of the variables between my handlebars delimiters and show movement template have the same exact names as the keys in my new movement object, when format show invokes the show movement template function with that new movement object passed in, I can inject the values corresponding to the keys in the new movement object to replace the variables in the handlebars template. So once again, the HTML template with values injected from the new movement object becomes the inner HTML. So it becomes the inner HTML of this div with a class of container. So as I can see, every single time I click the next or previous button, it's taking the div with a class of container and replacing its HTML with the handlebars template with values injected for the next or previous movement. In this case, I gave the next exercise as an example. So that's basically a little glimpse of my app. There are certainly other features that I have developed through, JSON formatting, but I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for listening.